Not quite, it just has to load.
Okay.
Okay, we're good to go.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's work session for the Montgomery County Education, Elections, and Housing Committee. Excited to see you all here this morning and to be talking about the 4 bills before our committee. It is my hope that we can have a great productive discussion and potentially vote out as many of these bills as we can to advance them to our delegation for consideration at the start of session. We had a great hearing last week where we heard a lot of the concerns and thoughts before us. So welcome the additional feedback and suggestions as well from members. As a reminder, our delegation staff member Rebecca has created a Google Drive that you all have access to with all of the bill materials, the bill summary, as well as the proposed amendments that are before us today. I ask that you please have that available to you so that you can review them alongside the meeting as we're going through the materials. This is our first time doing this in a virtual format, so I ask your forgiveness for any choppiness that we have along the way. This is 2020 after all, so I anticipate we'll probably have at least something pop up. We are going to begin this morning with Delegate Ludke's bill on campaign financing. So that bill number is MC 1421, Montgomery County Public Campaign Financing Expansion. As you'll recall from our bill hearing last week, the bill expands the law authorizing Montgomery County to establish a voluntary public campaign finance system for a couple of additional offices, namely the Circuit Court, Register of Wills, the Sheriff, and the State's Attorney. Delegate Ludke has joined us this morning to share any additional information about the bills or answer any questions from EEH members. If you have a question for Delegate Ludke, please raise your hand in the chat and I will recognize you. Otherwise, I will turn the floor to Delegate Ludke for a brief discussion of the bill and any amendments. I believe there are none at this time, and I will keep an eye to see if there's any members who have any questions. Delegate Ludke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a whole lot to add beyond the hearing and beyond what you just shared. I mean, it is a relatively simple authorizing bill, giving the county the authority to expand public financing if they so choose. So I'm happy to take any questions that committee members have.
Great, thank you so much. Love it when they're easy. I don't see any hands raised in the participant list. So seeing that there are no amendments and no questions for our bill sponsor, do we have a motion to move the bill? From any EH member? Thank you. We have a motion from Delegate or Vice Chair Stewart to move Delegate Ludke's bill. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Delegate Cullison. This is our first time voting by this format. So do I call the members? Does Rebecca? I'll call them. Okay, Delegate Queen, how do you vote? Delegate Queen votes in support. Vice Chair Stewart, how do you vote?
Yes.
Delegate Cullison, how do you vote?
Yes.
Delegate Plakovich-Carr?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. All right, so that is unanimous. Thank you, Delegate Ludke, for your bill. We will now, you're welcome to stay on if you'd like, or you may leave. Have a wonderful morning. We will now move on to Delegate Crutchfield's bill that is before us. So give me one moment to pull up those materials. So Delegate Crutchfield's bill is MC 321, Montgomery County Cooperative Housing Corporations, Condominiums, and Homeowners Association Reserve Studies. So as you all recall from last week, the bill requires a study every 5 years of the reserves required for future major repairs and replacement of the common elements of a cooperative housing corporation or condominium, or the common areas of an HOA in Montgomery County. It only applies to a co-op or condo in Montgomery County or an HOA in Montgomery County that has responsibility under its declaration for maintaining and repairing common areas. It does not apply to an HOA that issues bonds to meet capital expenditures. As a reminder to members, you have the access to the Google folder that has all of the bill materials. There is one technical amendment offered by our bill sponsor, Delegate Crutchfield. So I will turn the floor to Delegate Crutchfield to answer any questions and to speak to this amendment. Delegate Crutchfield.
Good morning, Chair and colleagues. Just quickly, I think Delegate Shetty described the bill very well. There is an amendment, and it's to clarify more than anything, and that is to allow, after that initial reserve study that's conducted, any reserve study conducted after that in the interim of 5 years would just be an update, so that the cost is reduced and the entities do not have to do a full reserve study. So that is really what that does, that amendment does. Are there any questions?
I have several questions, but I'll wait for others if they have some.
Okay, I saw Delegate Collison raise your hand, and then Delegate Queen, you will be right after her. Delegate Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question. I just want to say I think this bill is really essential. I've been working with the condominium associations for the last 6 or 7 years. They are really suffering, since 2008, basically, because what happened to the housing market in 2008. The reserves have not kept up. The associations are not able to maintain themselves. People, are leaving apartments because they can't, or condos because they can't afford the mortgage and the condo fees. So I'm in full support of this bill and really hope that the committee will see it favorably. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Collison.
Thank you. Delegate Queen.
Sure. So I thank you all for the sponsor, and I think Mr. Fine, who sent me information about this bill. And I guess I'm kind of leaning on to making a comment about what Delegate Collison says, because when I hear from condominiums and HOAs in my area, the issue is they're not able to collect from people now, right? And they don't have enough in their reserves because they aren't collecting from people, some of the members now. And so I guess I'm not understanding how forcing them to have a study which they have to pay for, that's going to tell them you don't have enough money in your reserves, helps them to collect the money in there that they need, especially during this time frame when we're now having people having more issues because of COVID and not being able to pay their mortgage and utilities. They're not going to be able to pay their HOA fees. So that's kind of problem number one for me is, one, how are we going to enforce this and make it even better for them because they're having a problem now? Two, the timing, it may be needed, but now we're asking it to be done in a time where people are already strapped. And three, when I did just a simple poll of my district of the HOAs, and I have most of the residents don't even know about this. So it would be something that would be a big surprise for them. So any thoughts on that?
Okay, so I'm gonna try to answer your questions from the end to the beginning. So your first question or your third question was about them not knowing about reserve studies. Well, first of all, the condo associations, the governing boards are the ones that actually conduct the reserve studies. And it's very surprising to me to hear that any members of a condo association HOA would not know that, because that should be listed in their statement from their treasurer's report on what is going on within their actual community. So that's very surprising to hear.
Well, I can tell you I'm one, and I don't know, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay. But again, that's something that's done, because remember, part of this is, I understand the concern about trying to get people to pay their HOA fees, but part of this also is to upkeep the property, because that's where the value is. Remember, for most people, the investment in a home of any kind, condo, whatever, is the largest investment they'll make. And so in order to keep that property in good shape, you have to be able to repair, replace the common areas. And that's what this is all about, to ensure that that continues, because there is, a possibility of resale in the future. So that's what this does.
Mhm.
And as Delegate Collison mentioned, my district, I have found that there are several very small communities who have actually suffered as a result of this. They cannot pave roadways within their communities. They're unable to actually do roofing because the reserve account is so low or doesn't exist at all. So I think it is critical to have something in place that will provide this for homeowners, because even though, as you said, yes, we are in a very, a time that is just a time that we just weren't prepared for, and we do understand that people do not have money, but also those HOAs should be making adjustments for that as well. This bill is not going to do that, okay? This bill is about the upkeep of the properties, making sure there's the proper funding for replacement, et cetera. What you're talking about, Delegate Queen, maybe we can work on another time, a bill to help homeowners to be able to do that. And I would assume, hopefully, collectively with some of the legislation that's going to be created, some of those things like HOA fees, et cetera, may actually be taken care of for people that are not able to pay them right now. I don't know if any of the other advocates or even Delegate Holmes may want to chime in here to help answer Delegate Queen's questions.
Delegate Holmes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank Delegate Crutchfield for proposing this legislation. Delegate Queen, you do raise some valid questions, and I want to address them, particularly the last one and the second one. As you might be aware, this is my third year. This is a 3-year process thus far. Last year, there was a statewide bill proposed as well as a Prince George's County bill proposed. And because session terminated early, the statewide bill did not get through. But the Prince George's County bill did get through. And the reason why I mention that is to address your question. How will boards of directors be notified of the new law? When the new law went into effect in Prince George's County, the property managers notified the boards of directors and the boards of directors for all of the HOAs, condominiums, and co-ops that they managed. The letters went out so that the boards of directors knew about the new law. And as part of my professional job, I am a CMCA, a certified manager for property managers associations as well. And part of my certification as a CMCA, all of the CMCAs or above in the state of Maryland do receive notices of new laws that come in every year. And we have monthly meetings in the chapters. So the property managers of common ownership communities will be aware of the new law. And like they've done in Prince George's County, in most cases, 99% of the cases, the notices are sent to the board of directors. So, and the other question you asked about is in reference to the affordability of having a reserve study. There are multiple cases throughout the entire state of Maryland. And because I am chair of Housing and Real Property Subcommittee, I get calls from all over the state. Somerset, Charles, and Arundel County as well. They are suffering from special assessments. Special assessments are being created to prepare and to pay for reserves that have not been assessed. And because special assessments sometimes range between $6, $8, and in some cases $10,000 and $12,000, and the owners have a very short period of time to pay for them, they are not going into foreclosure. That's why another reason why the reserve studies are necessary. I just wanted to give you additional information, and I appreciate your questions, Delegate Queen.
Thank you for that helpful feedback. And thank you, Delegate Queen, for your questions. Do other members have any questions of the bill sponsor or any of the attendees who have joined to help with this bill? Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, do we have a motion on the amendment by the bill sponsor? I see Delegate Stewart's lips moving, but I think he is on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, move the amendments.
Thank you so much. Do we have a second from Delegate Plakovich-Carr. I am going to ask council to do a roll call vote this time. I apologize for my earlier.
Chair Shetty, how do you vote?
I vote in support.
Vice Chair Stewart? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Delegate Palakovich-Carr, how do you vote?
Yes.
Delegate Collison?
Yes.
And Delegate Queen, how do you vote?
No.
All right. Thank you. And do we have a motion on the bill as amended?
I'll move the bill.
Okay. Vice Chair Stewart has moved the bill as amendment. Do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
Second by Delegate Palakovich-Carr. Council, can you please do a roll call?
Chair Shetty, how do you vote?
Yes.
Vice Chair Stewart, how do you vote?
Yes.
Delegate Palakovich-Carr, how do you vote?
Yes.
Delegate Collison, how do you vote?
Yes.
Delegate Queen, how do you vote?
No.
Thank you. And so that bill has passed as amended. Thank you, Delegate Crutchfield, for your bill, and to the committee for the helpful discussion. Colleagues who are on the line for that bill, you are welcome to stay with us or you are welcome to drop off. It is up to you. Thank you for joining us this morning and have a wonderful day. We are now going to move on to our third bill before us, and that is Delegate Wilkins, MC 821, the Montgomery County Stable Homes Act. This bill prohibits evictions of a tenant holding over beyond the expiration of a lease in Montgomery County in the absence of just cause under certain circumstances. It specifies the circumstances under which just cause exists in a certain action to evict, and that just cause is not required under certain circumstances. It requires certain notice to a tenant to be sent, and it authorizes a landlord to file to evict a tenant only after providing the tenant with not less than 60 days notice. There are additional reporting requirements for the county. And as you all know, this bill passed the Montgomery County delegation last session as well. So there are two amendments before us there. And as I, again, will remind colleagues on the line that we have our Google Drive folder with all of the bill materials, including the bill summary that I just read, as well as the sponsor amendment and the county council alternate amendment suggested before us. So I'm going to turn the floor to Delegate Wilkins to provide some initial brief thoughts on the amendment that she is offering. And then we can turn to council to provide some thoughts on the council amendment that is before us. And we can have questions as well from any members of EEH. Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and good morning to all of my colleagues and everyone on the line. Yes, so I would like to share with you a little bit about the first amendment, which I believe is a sponsor amendment from me. What this amendment does is that it removes late payment of rent as a just cause in the bill. You may recall that the delegation added this as a just cause maybe last session or the session before. I think that having late payment as a just cause actually muddies the waters because we already have a failure to pay rent statute in the state. And my bill does not affect the failure to pay rent statute. So a landlord who's dealing with rent issues should go through failure to pay rent. So my concern is that by including late rent payments as a just cause in the bill, it actually confuses and muddies the water in terms of the purpose of this bill. And if a landlord has rent issues, it makes it unclear, should they go through the failure to pay rent statute? Should they go through this just cause statute? It just creates confusion. In addition to that, what we currently have in the bill where it has 4 late rent payments, we all know from this pandemic that paying your rent late 4 times is actually pretty easy to occur. And so this will have, I think, an unintended effect of making it really easy for a landlord to just evict someone for that just cause. So I'm requesting your support to remove failure to pay rent as a just cause. I understand that the county council wants to add a provision or Madam Chair, do you want me to just stay on that amendment? Okay. So that is.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilkins, for framing out your amendment. Let's talk about this one first, and then see if there are any questions from members about this one, if that's okay. Do any members? Yes, Delegate Queen.
So I think I have a question. It may be related to what the county council wanted because the bill sponsor, Delegate Wilkins, sent out something yesterday that talked about the county council's amendments, and I believe that she's not in support of them. So how do they relate to this? Because they were related. I thought they were also related to late payment. Is that not true, or am I?
That is correct. The county council offered an alternate amendment to what the sponsor had suggested. And maybe it might make sense then, if there are no questions for the bill sponsor about her specific amendment, we can have the county, Delegate Queen, if it's okay, can we table your question until we get to the county council's amendment discussion? And we'll come right back to that so we can answer that. Okay, Delegate Collison, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So Delegate Wilkins, is it true now that landlords are using current existing statute to evict on the basis of late payments of rent?
Let me answer your question this way. Hopefully this answers it. Whenever rent is late, even if it's on the second day, yes. If it's December 2nd, a landlord can go file for eviction and file a complaint to evict currently in statute. So that's why I think that having this in just cause is unnecessary.
And
hopefully that answers your question.
I think so. And I also wanted to add that during the hearing, what I heard from the opposition was that failure to pay rent was the primary cause of eviction, in 80% or more of the cases. So clearly that part of the statute is working. To the extent that it is supposed to. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Other questions for the bill sponsor specifically about her amendment? Okay, Amy, would you like to speak to the county council's alternate amendment? and what it seeks to.
Sure. Sure. And I just, for the record, I want to say that the county executive is in support of Delegate Wilkins' amendment. We have a split position on this, so I just wanted to make that clear. The county council voted to support an alternate amendment. They were in support of the addition of this amendment, I believe, last year to the bill, the habitual late payment. But in acknowledgement of what's going on with the pandemic and understanding that late payment, as Delegate Wilkins mentioned, is certainly an issue right now, they had a suggested alternate amendment. And I do, just to speak to the amendment a little bit in general, habitual late payment is different in terms of failure to pay rent. So failure to pay rent is failure to pay rent entirely, and it has to go through a fairly extensive process, which takes time. So if folks are habitually paying their rent late, it is entirely possible that by the time they get to court, they'll have caught up. And that statute as it stands is currently only applies to when you're under a lease, whereas this bill deals with after the lease is ended with a holdover tenant, and under current law, holdover tenant can be removed under a different statute. So I think the intent of the amendment originally, habitual late payment, was for somebody who just continuously pays late. That being said, the council, as I mentioned, voted to support an alternate where any rent that becomes due and payable while there's a federal or state moratorium on evictions in place does not count towards the just cause for evicting somebody under the statute. So it would just mean simply that, as long as there's a pause and understanding there's, pandemic or whatever may be going on, that the tenant cannot, if they pay late, it can't be used against them.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I know I see Vice Chair Stewart has a question. I know Delegate Queen had a question as to how these were related. Delegate Stewart, before we get to you, I wanted to see if we could go back to our bill sponsor and have her answer Delegate Queen's question about how this amendment relates to your amendment and your thoughts on that, please.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak on this, Madam Chair. Yes, I would like to urge the committee to oppose this amended amendment. Again, this is the same exact issue. It's saying that this just cause of paying your rent late 4 times applies except in the cases of a moratorium. We have to think of just cause in the long term as well. And keep in mind that the moratorium for the federal moratorium is ending December 31st. We have the governor's affirmative defense, which is actually not a moratorium. So that is not, that doesn't even apply. So what I'm saying is that this is creating a very small exception, but still has the issue of muddying the waters in terms of us already having a failure to pay rent statute. Just cause should not create another way to sort of mitigate rent issues. That's not the intent of this bill in terms of mitigating rent payment. So I am concerned, strongly concerned, that by including this provision, we are now making this just cause legislation sort of mitigating rent. Again, a landlord, if rent is late just 1 day, a landlord can file a complaint in terms of being able to get repossession of their unit. So I just think that this is muddying the waters of the purpose of this legislation and making it a sort of easy way for landlords to get to evict someone. Paying your rent late 4 times is pretty easy to happen. I'll admit I'm a renter and sometimes I pay on the 2nd, sometimes I pay on the 1st. So I'm just saying that I don't think that this is something that is actually reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
So-
Yes, go ahead,
So
Delegate.
may I follow up? Thank you.
Yeah.
So, let me be clear. So trying to understand. So last time when we passed the bill, we had to put something, or people wanted us, so the county wanted us to put something in. So it was dealing with late payment so that it made, I guess, made them support the bill. Is that not the wording that we're putting back in again? Or I'm trying to find out how different is this bill now from what was passed before? Because it seems like it's not like it was last session. Is that correct?
Delegate Queen, so the bill as introduced is the version that was passed by the Montgomery County delegation. And the amendment that Delegate Wilkins is seeking is an amendment to remove that specific failure to pay rent.
Which was added last session. Am I?
Council has some feedback.
Council, I'm sorry to interrupt. However, this amendment has not been seen by DLS yet, so we will not be able to vote on it today since the amendment did not come through our office.
Which amendment?
The county council amendment.
Okay, that's helpful to note, but we can have a discussion on it, I think.
Yes, we can have the discussion. I just wanted to let you know that we have not had the opportunity to review the amendment, and we will need that opportunity before we can vote on it.
That makes sense. Thank you for that. Delegate Wilkins, would you mind please responding to Delegate Queen's question?
Yes, Delegate Queen, as introduced, the bill is exactly in the form that it passed last session. What I am trying to do is that at some point we added in this late rent payment as a just cause.
Last session.
To be completely honest, I don't remember exactly when we've introduced this bill 3 times. I forget exactly when we added it in, but
it was in the one we passed, right?
Yes. This bill is in the exact form currently of how we passed it.
And then we're taking it out.
Yes. So what I'm bringing to the committee is that I believe, and I mentioned this and expressed my concern at the time that we added it in. But what I'm bringing into the committee is that I think that this just cause, adding this late rent payment that we've included in the bill is a problem. And I think we've really seen that in this pandemic, how easy it is to have late payment of rent, especially just 4 times. And I think even beyond the pandemic, people were rent burdened beyond the pandemic. So if what we're saying is, well, if you pay your rent late, maybe on the 2nd or 3rd or 4th, 4 times, that's also a just cause. I think that is really sort of against the goals of the bill. And once again, we have an entire failure to pay rent statute that exists that my bill does not make any changes to. So landlords should go through failure to pay rent, and we should not use this just cause legislation to mitigate rent issues.
Understood. I guess what I was just trying to get a sense of is the bill we passed last session had this provision in it about late payment.
Yes.
We passed. And so now you're bringing the bill from last session in, but you're taking a piece out that was part of what people passed last time.
Right, exactly, Delegate.
Okay. So it really makes it bill not what we passed last time.
Exactly.
Okay. That's what I want to understand, because again, that means we may not have the same outcome for this bill when we have the full delegation talk to it, because it's not the same bill anymore.
That's possible.
Concern?
I think that's always possible if you change a bill, but I actually think this makes the bill better and stronger. And I think as a matter of policy, whether people support the overall bill or don't support it, I think this is actually a policy issue and a policy challenge that this bill is creating when you are adding a failure to pay rent or a late payment of rent issue into just cause. I think it's actually a policy concern whether someone supports the overall bill or not. I think we want to make sure that it's still sound policy-wise.
Okay, thank you. This is really helpful. Vice Chair Stewart, you have a question.
For the county on their amendment.
It's very difficult to hear you. Can you speak up?
Oh, sorry. I think maybe I'm just like speaking too softly. Is that better? So on the county on its amendment, my question is basically, My issue with the county amendment is that we don't currently have a moratorium on either the state or federal level on evictions, and we never have, and we never will. And so I assume that therefore the definition of moratorium includes what currently exists under federal and state law, which is, what the court system defines as an affirmative defense. Is that right?
I believe that was the intent of council staff, that it would need to be defined as something other than, because as you pointed out, we have an executive order that is an affirmative defense, and we've got the federal one in place as well. So the intent, and we just received the feedback yesterday, that the intent of the language, and it obviously needs to go through DLS, is in order to protect renters who pay their rent late during something that they're experiencing right now. And so yes, the language does need to be changed in order to, that's the intent of the amendment.
Okay, got it. Okay, that makes sense. I think that, certainly, yeah, I mean, the current language, I think, we probably have to define moratorium as something weaker. I mean, I think that then brings the question, or the problem with sort of having a broad definition, is that any old affirmative defense would do, no matter how limited, So for example, if Governor Hogan redid his executive order and said, okay, there's a new affirmative defense against evictions, but it only applies to people with one leg, over 85, and who have lived in their apartment for more than 45 years. That would, I think, under most definitions of how, depending on how we define affirmative defense under the bill, if it's just any old state or federal affirmative defense related to evictions, then that would qualify, and then we wouldn't get this added provision. So it's a little bit, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure, the county, the council at the county level is, much better at this than me in terms of bill drafting. So I'm sure there is an elegant way to draw it, but I just wanted to point that to, it's a little bit of a tough definitional issue to both encompass what's happening now without making it so weak that essentially it has no effect. So yeah, I guess I'll just pivot from that. I guess we can't vote on that amendment anyway, but I like Janelle's amendment. I mean, I think it's just much simpler from just kind of a efficiency and just drafting perspective to take care of rent problems and not paying your rent in one part of the statute, and take care of non-renewal of leases for legitimate purposes in another part of the statute. So I like it. I don't know if we're going to be voting on that or not today. I like it. And I think that I get where the county is coming from. I understand that they want to say, well, this is a decent idea, but let's just do it when people are undergoing hardship. And I would maybe be predisposed to sort of hearing that out, but honestly, I'm just not sure how we would ever draft that in a way that encompasses an affirmative defense that's actually meaningful, as opposed to affirmative defenses that are not meaningful. And I would argue, honestly, that for many people, even the governor's current affirmative defense is essentially meaningless.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stewart. That's helpful feedback. Delegate Polakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also just wanted to weigh in to say that I support the sponsor's amendment and am not inclined to support the county amendment, which is not officially before us anyways for consideration, but those are my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. Are there other members with feedback or questions on either of these amendments or the underlying bill before us? Seeing none, as council noted, we don't officially have language for an alternate council amendment to consider and vote on. However, there seems to be vocal support enough for a sponsor amendment consideration potentially. Do we have a motion before us on the sponsor amendment?
So moved.
Moved by Delegate Polakovich-Carr. Did I hear a second?
Second.
Seconded by Vice Chair Stewart. Council, can you please do a roll call vote on the sponsor amendment?
Yes. Delegate Collison,
Yes.
Delegate Polakovich-Carr,
Yes.
Delegate Queen,
I'll abstain. I'm not really understanding it.
Delegate Stewart,
Yes.
and Chair Shetty.
Yes. So that is 4 in favor and 1 abstention on the sponsor amendment. The sponsor amendment passes. So do we have a motion on the underlying bill as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by
Madam
Vice
Chair, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we want to proceed this way without having the conversation of the county's amendment before we do a vote on the bill.
Oh, the data amendment?
Pardon?
The data amendment? Did we cover that?
Did we have an official data amendment from them? Council? No.
I do not believe that we do. Are you speaking of the county council amendment?
So I think during the hearing, there was a discussion about an amendment regarding the report date.
Mhm.
I don't recall seeing that. And then I know we've been having a discussion right now about the alternate amendment to the sponsor amendment. So just clarifying, Delegate Collison, are you referencing either of those or both of them?
Well, to me, it seems like we, and I don't want to hold the bill up necessarily, but if we don't have all the information, we're going to end up going through this process in the bigger group
Right.
without having had the benefit of our conversation.
That's
So,
true. Yeah.
so if we know, that the county has those amendments, at least if, unless they're going to withdraw them. If there is a data amendment out there, then, we should know what that is. I just feel like it's a cleaner process if we wait until we actually have the amendments.
Okay. Amy, do you have amendment language to share with council so that we can get something drafted?
Sure. What it would do is simply move the date in which the board requirement is back 1 year. And the suggestion was simply so that there could be a full year of data to report. So it would be a more complete picture. That was, I believe that was simply all that it was. And I know that Delegate Wilkins has some comments on it as well.
I'm sorry, you can't, I don't know if it's a connection problem on my end or yours, but I was having a lot of trouble hearing that. So
can you hear me now?
Yes. You just cut in and out a lot. So I heard something about pushing out the report date by the year and that Delegate Wilkins has feedback on that. That's all I caught.
So what it would do is exactly that, is push the reporting date for the county, the reporting requirement for the county back to September of 2023. So that there would be a full year of data. Can you hear me?
A little bit. So there's a full year of data.
Yes. And that was, simply all that it was. But I know from an email exchange with Delegate Wilkins that she had some feedback on that change.
Okay. Delegate Wilkins, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I leave this one up to the wisdom of the committee. I'll just share that 2023 just feels like a very long time from now, given what is happening in our county, number of evictions that we have going on. I understand the need to have a the desire to have a full year of data, but I also think that in the time that we're in, having the county present the information that they have is also useful. So my only concern is that 2023 just feels like a long time from now, given all that is going on. But I leave this one to the wisdom of this illustrious committee. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so where we are right now is we have voted to support the sponsor amendment, which in my view by default means that we've adopted that over the proposed county council alternate amendment, which we don't have language on that's been approved by DLS and can't vote on at this time. So before us right now is a discussion of another amendment by the county on the data component. which we've heard from the bill sponsor now, her feedback. Now, do we have that language available, council, for us to consider, or has that also not been provided to DLS for review?
That has also not been provided to DLS. If you would like, they could submit the language to us, but we would not be able to consider that today.
We would also not be able to vote on that today. Okay.
Yes.
Can I hear from members of the committee on what your general thoughts are on this? Yes, Vice Chair Stewart.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say, this is the kind of thing where I feel like if we did kick it to the full committee to take up, it wouldn't be the end of the world, because we're literally just changing one digit of one date. So I don't know, others may feel differently, but I personally would not have a huge problem with us passing the bill as is through the local committee, sending it to full committee. And if we wanted to then consider an amendment from the county that went through DLS that literally just changes the date from 2022 to 2023, I feel like that's probably something that's sufficiently non-complex that our colleagues in the full delegation would not be super upset with us.
I apologize for interrupting, but is it just changing that one date? Is that all the amendment would entail for the data?
That's correct. That's all the amendment would entail.
Thank you.
Okay. And Delegate Plakovich-Carr, I saw briefly your hand was raised. Yes.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I raised my hand and lowered it and then raised it again. Well, I guess I'm just wondering process-wise and what the time frame is. Like, do we have a full delegation voting session date set at this point? And, you know, would things be held up by if we don't vote on the amendments today? You know, I'm just trying to weigh that out in terms of where I might settle out in terms of whether or not to move the bill today or not.
Council?
So I apologize. I was just informed that since it is just one date, we could do a voice vote on the data amendment.
Okay. Is that something that the committee would support doing? A voice vote on the data amendment in general? Okay. All right. So to answer Delegate Plakovich-Carr's question, we are seeking to get as many of our bills and our drawer cleared as soon as possible to tee it up for delegation consideration because of the nature of session this year. And so our hope was to be able to vote out as many of our bills as possible today, with the anticipation that the full delegation will start meeting once session convenes in January. If we have any remaining, which we're coming close to the end of our hour today, we may need to schedule one additional work session between now and the start of session. So that's procedurally where we are. Delegate Collison.
Am I correct that we have a full delegation meeting set for January 7th?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right. So we have a little time between now and January 7th that seems to me this committee could come back together, particularly if we only have this one bill.
We also
to be ready for the 7th.
We haven't started consideration of Delegate Carr's bill yet. But
no, I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we do have some time. Let's also remember though that it's over the holidays, so
yeah.
So we'll try and schedule around everybody's needs as needed.
I guess just to follow up, just remember there is the 4th, the 5th, the 6th of January, right after the 1st. So anyway, just to offer that up. But if we're going to take a vote on the date change, I guess what I would I'd like to go with the full year of data, because with understanding the challenge of where we are right now, that makes everything different. Where we are right now makes everything different. Looking at the information that we have now under the circumstances of COVID, it's not a look at we're never going to be back to normal, right? But it just won't look at how things really work. And I think as a delegation, we're going to have a struggle because we are going to have to deal with folks who have been affected by, loss of work, loss of healthcare, loss of homes, But I'm not sure that this bill gets to it, and that the bill itself has, it is really geared towards when things are operating under normal circumstances, this is how they should operate. So that's why I would support the county's recommendation to move to 2023.
Okay, that's helpful feedback. Thank you, Delegate. Any further comments on the date change amendment? Okay, can we do a voice vote, or do we have a motion to do a voice vote on the data amendment? No motion. Okay. I think what we may want to think about doing then is getting this amendment drafted for consideration by the full delegation, if this is something that the full delegation may want to consider. You know, I think if we don't have a motion to move or even vote out this amendment here, then we don't have that amendment included. So the bill as it stands right now is as amendment with the sponsor amendment alone. So do we have a motion to move Delegate Wilkins' Just Cause or Stable Homes Act rather, as amended?
So moved.
Vice Chair Stewart moves. Any second on that?
Second.
Second by Delegate Palakovich-Carr. Council, can you please do a roll call vote?
Delegate Collison,
I'm gonna oppose in favor of us meeting again after we have the language.
Delegate Palakovich-Carr,
Yes.
Delegate Queen,
Staying.
Delegate Stewart,
Yes.
Delegate or Chair Shetty.
Yes. Okay, so the bill advances to the full delegation for consideration as amended with the sponsor amendment attached. I recommend that council please consider drafting the county council recommended amendment in the event that it is offered before the full delegation for consideration. And then it will move forward in that posture. So we now have just a few minutes left. Let's see where we get on our last bill of the day, which is Delegate Al-Khar's bill on the HOC. If you'll give me a moment, my mouse just disconnected, so I need to get that restarted. And then we can go forward on that. So our last bill before us today is MC 721, the Montgomery County Housing Opportunities Commission closed session offered by Delegate Carr. The bill limits the circumstances under which the HOC or a committee of the commission may meet in closed session. There were a couple of different, as drafted, the bill outlines a couple of different scenarios in which the committee may meet in closed session. And it also prohibits the commission from discussing or acting on matters while meeting in closed session that are not specified in the bill. We had a very robust hearing on this particular bill. And with us today, we have both the bill sponsor as well as Stacy Spann, the executive director of the HOC, to answer any questions from members. I understand that the bill sponsor and Mr. Spann have had a couple of discussions since the bill hearing, and that there is a proposed amendment offered by the bill sponsor. I'd like to give Delegate Carr an opportunity to speak to that amendment, and then we will hear any questions and discussion from members of the committee. Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. I think it's still morning, colleagues. So just a quick recap, the bill as introduced is identical to language that is in the code applying to the City of Annapolis Housing Authority. So my understanding is that in the late 1980s, the General Assembly or members of the General Assembly were concerned about transparency and accountability issues at the Annapolis Housing Authority. There was an AG opinion issued, and this bill was passed, I think, around 1992. So I have had similar concerns about the Montgomery County Housing Opportunities Commission, and you heard some of that in the testimony. So that is why I introduced this bill. In the Open Meetings Act, there are 14 reasons that you can meet in closed session as a legitimate exception. So as introduced, the HOC could have met under 5 of those exceptions. My amendment that I introduced at the hearing added some additional ones in the hearing. Chair Barve asked for 2 more to be added and a couple to be edited. So I was preparing to add in all those amendments, expanding that list. And then I had a conversation with Mr. Spann, the HOC Executive Director, yesterday. He also asked that I add an additional one of those exceptions. So the bill was starting to approach what the Open Meetings Act looked like. I think what happened with the Annapolis legislation is it was a snapshot in time of the Open Meetings Act in 1992, and over time it sort of got out of date. So I think there's a risk of that happening with the way that this bill was drafted. So there is a sponsor amendment that strikes the bill, and it replaces it with much simpler, much clearer language. With this language, it gives the HOC much more flexibility. They can meet under any of the rules of the 14 rules in the Open Meetings Act in closed section in 3-305B. If the Open Meetings Act is ever amended, they can take advantage of those because it's by reference. It's not copying and paste those things from one section of the code to the other. It still clarifies that the committees of the HOC are public bodies and are subject to the Open Meetings Act. And it still would not allow the HOC or its committees to meet under the problematic that's not in the, there's an exception that's not in the list of 14 that if you read the Open Meetings Act manual written by the Attorney General, it recommends that public bodies do not use the other exception, which is called the administrative function exception, which is, if you look at the definition, it's circular, it's problematic. They just recommend avoiding it. So as amended, simpler and clearer bill that I think addresses many of the stated concerns about the bill, gives HOC more flexibility. I think it's much easier to enforce. And so that is the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Carr. And just to clarify, Council, this is an amendment that DLS has drafted. Yes, okay, and that is located, Rebecca, in our Google Drive. Yes, okay. So thank you, Delegate Carr. That's very helpful. Do any members have any questions to our bill sponsor about the amendment suggested before us today? Yes, Delegate Collison, you are on mute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to clarify, Delegate Carr. So are you, in your amendment, are you including language that directs the HOC not to use the administrative function, or are we going to rely on the current Open Meetings Act and the sort of the guidance of the Attorney General's office to assure that HOC is abiding by that? I just wasn't clear from the way you described
the bill is very short with this amendment. So I'll just read the amendment language. It's pretty clear. It says, except as provided in subsection B of this section, the Montgomery Commission or a committee of the Montgomery Commission shall meet in open session. And then in subsection B, it says, the commission may meet in closed session only for the reasons authorized under 3-305B of the general provisions article. So
Okay,
it says you can meet for any of those 14 reasons. It doesn't say that you can meet for this other reason that's not in that list of 14, that's in a different section of the code, which is called the administrative function.
got it. Okay, thank you.
Delegate Queen.
Sorry, I didn't think I had a question, but now I do. So, so basic, because I didn't get a chance, and I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to look at the amendment, so, and I'm trying to go do it right now. So basically, we have just changed the original bill to codify the Attorney General's wording for Annapolis. I mean, for Anne Arundel County. Was that an Anne Arundel County? Is that the case? Is that what?
So yeah, instead of the approach that they used in 1992 for the city of Annapolis, and which I think was flawed in that it's a snapshot in time, because I think what they did back then is they copy and paste the Open Meetings Act exclusions, and over time those got out of date. So we're avoiding that approach, and we're simply referring to that entire section of the Open Meetings Act that lists the 14 reasons, saying that they can meet in closed session for any of those 14 reasons, and it will never get out of date because we're referring to it instead of like copy pasting it.
Right. So I guess the question is, if we're referring to the Open Meetings Act, which has specific language, do we need legislation, or do we just need to address issues as they would come up, or deal with things as they come up? Do we need legislation to do that, I guess?
Yes, we still need legislation for two reasons. Number one, the bill as amended, it clarifies that committees of the HOC are subject to the act. And that was the issue that came up in the Open Meetings Act complaint and the Open Meetings Compliance Board ruling on November 2nd. So it addresses that one issue. And then the second issue that it addresses is that it would prohibit the HOC from meeting under the problematic administrative function, which is not one of the 14, which is also allowed in the act, but which, if you read the Open Meetings Act manual written by the Attorney General, they advise that public bodies should avoid meeting under that exclusion because its definition is circular, it's very vague. So those are the two reasons why the bill is still needed with this amendment.
That's not clear to me. It's still needed because it's already specified that you shouldn't be using that administrative code or whatever.
It's recommended, but public bodies can use it. But if you read the manual, it's discouraged, but public bodies are within the law to use it.
And so you're saying you don't want us to ever use it in Montgomery County then? Because if it's just, so there should be no reasons why we should ever use administrative.
The administrative under this bill as amended, the HOC would not be able to meet under the administrative function exception.
And why has that been a problem? And why would that be something we would make just for Montgomery County? Because it's only recommended by the board.
Right, because the HOC unfortunately has a pattern of violating the Open Meetings Act, not just for the committees, but for the full commission. That happened in 2018. I believe it happened in 2019 and 2020. I think it happened last month. So we need something stronger. I think this is a sensible remedy. There are a lot of examples in the code where we require a specific agency to exceed the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. This would be another one of those. So I think it's appropriate.
So I guess not to belabor this, and maybe we'll have to take this up because we're at our hour, but just looking at, and I know, thank you for getting back to me some of the questions, but just looking at your responses and some of the questions, first of all, I haven't seen where there's been this, I guess, over alarming concern, because I'm not sure what is considered reasonable or not. And let me try to clarify. So the issue was, our understanding, over the past 5 years, there's been 100 closed door meetings. And so if I just look at that on the average, we're talking about 5 years, 100, that's only 20 a year, which is almost less than around 2 a month. And I'm not sure that's a problem in itself, because I don't have any sense of, is that too much for an organization? Is that not enough for an organization? I mean, just in my job, I meet 2 times a week behind closed doors to talk about students, to talk about faculty and whatever. So I don't know that that's necessarily a problem. But then when, I asked, well, what was the recommendation from the Open Meetings Compliance Board? It was just that, I think it was just for them to start to have these meetings and have them streamed. And so, and that ruling didn't come up until what, November or something, or December from your notes. So we haven't seen what is a pattern of problems. And then I asked, well, do we know what's happened before the 5 years or whatever, this time frame? And we don't have that data yet. I think you said you're going to go back and get it. So I don't see that we had the issue that, that happened in 1980 with Anne Arundel County. I'm not seeing that we have an issue where once someone has been told to do something differently, they have not complied. So I'm not sure we need legislation at this point. And that's my concern, that, do we need legislation at this point, or can we just monitor this and see and give us some data to show that this is really this much of an issue? Because I've not seen that yet. I mean, maybe
I'll just briefly respond by saying, well, the Open Meetings Compliance Board, they respond to complaints and they determine whether the act applies and whether the act was followed. They don't recommend legislation.
I didn't expect them to recommend legislative. I asked, do they recommend corrective action? And was that corrective action not done?
So when a public body is found to have violated the act, they have to just acknowledge that they made the violation in their next public meeting. They have to send a signed written statement back to the board. And the HOC they have had 1 committee meeting since that ruling, and or 2 rather, there was 1 earlier today, and they did comply with the notice. However, that's the committees, and that was sort of an issue that was in contention. The committees are, the full HOC is a 7-member board. The committees were 3-member, 3 members of the board convening as a committee, kind of like we're doing today as a committee of the delegation. So that was one issue. And I think the other issue is the 7-member board itself, the HOC itself. I believe, in looking at the meeting documents over the past several years, they have a monthly meeting, and then they also have special meetings, from time to time. I don't think they've ever complied with the Open Meetings Act. They do hold closed meetings fairly frequently because they take up real estate issues and other issues, and that's legitimate. But I can't think of a single instance in the past 3 years where the Open Meetings Act has been followed by the HOC when they're convening in a closed session. So it is much bigger than the rule.
Explain what that, but explain what that means. In the last few months, they haven't complied by meeting in a closed session. You're saying they can't meet in a,
so they have
weren't giving
met.
they weren't. I wasn't finished. I'm sorry. I talked slowly. they weren't meeting, or they weren't giving the right code or explanation of the type of, they were calling it administrative and if something else. I mean, explain what you mean they haven't been doing it. Where was the error? Where was the?
Sure. So they have met in session probably about once a month or even more. But
It doesn't still seem like that's a problem yet, but go ahead.
Which is allowed. You can meet in closed session.
Right, go ahead.
Your public body, you have to meet all the requirements of the act for notice and, you know, the citation of the reason, topic. So there's a checklist of things you have to do to close a meeting in compliance with the act. And I believe that they have not done so in compliance with the act even once over the past several years.
And what was the violations that you're saying, why you don't believe it? They didn't, what on the checklist did they not do?
So the notice not being properly done, when you close, you convene an open session and then adjourn to closed session. When you close, you can't just cite the statute. You have to give a topic, a slightly more detailed reason for your meeting. Those are some of the reasons off the top of my head, but yeah, if you don't follow the checklist, you're not complying with the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, I still, again, I'm not seeing the need for legislation. And maybe my thought about when we do legislation, I'm thinking we have very egregious issues that can't be handled under, you know, normal sorts of, you know, situations, letting people know, okay, this was wrong, and then you don't do it, then I can say, okay, I need to slap your hand because you're not paying attention. But I haven't seen that. So that's just my concern. Do we need the legislation at this point? Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Queen. Delegate Plakovich-Carr, I see your hand is raised, but Delegate Stewart also had a question. So I'm going to turn to him first, and then you are next. Vice Chair Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question about the amendment, I think I understand now what the bill does. So you basically nix the administrative function exception, and I'm looking at like some of the OMA guidance from like the state about that exception. And you're right that it's thorny and it's complicated, and they advise it of sort of using it sparingly. And then number two, it seems like you're codifying the recent opinion about the committees, right? So basically, like, based on the recent ruling, the committees of HOC are going to have to meet regardless, but you're codifying that in law so that like a future adjudicator couldn't come around and reverse that. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So I think I got it. So my question goes, I guess, a little bit to, and my only hesitation about the administrative function exception is, the Open Meetings Act is a law. It's kind of a boilerplate default that applies to every single agency across the entire state, across multiple jurisdictions. So there are, presumably hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of entities that basically are operating under the exact same boilerplate, apparently with the exception of Annapolis. So my question is, what happened in Annapolis? Like what triggered them having these different rules in the 80s?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what happened. I can forward you the OAG opinion that a legislator requested in 1988 who was concerned about these transparency and accountability issues. And the OAG said, okay, here are all the things you could do, to address that. And one of them was, what turned out to be the bill they passed in the early 90s on closed meetings.
Got it. Okay. I tried to just do like a cursory Google search myself while Delegate Queen, I'm still paying attention to you, Delegate Queen, don't worry, but trying to also search on Google to figure out if I could learn what happened. And on the one hand, it seems like they did really serious stuff. Like they were under FBI investigation at one point. So at one point, it seems like the housing authority was probably like truly egregiously terrible. But then I found a different article where it seemed like the mayor and the police chief were opposed to the housing authority because it wanted to add new housing units, which is kind of weird. I think it kind of speaks to the politics of the 80s, because their argument, literally the police chief, I mean, I don't think you could possibly get away with this today, but the police chief in this Washington Post article is literally saying, we think the housing authority is bad because it wants to add like 2,000 more units. And we know that if new housing units are added, there will be more crime because the low income residents abiding or living in the units will be criminals. He's saying that in the Washington Post. So I don't know. I guess my only hesitation is I'm not sure if the Annapolis precedent is something we really want to go down on either front, either because it seems like, I'm the first to say, I think HOC certainly, and it seems like, Mr. Spann has admitted has gone through problems, and Delegate Carr, I tip my hat to you for being on top of this stuff and to putting complaints in and policing them, because you've gone above and beyond the call of your legislative duties to do that. And clearly there are problems, but I just wonder if we really want to be the second jurisdiction to take this step, if we don't fully understand the precedent we're setting for other agencies, and if we don't fully understand what Annapolis did, either they were extremely egregious in terms of like criminal behavior, in which case I don't think that this applies, or it seems like maybe the complaints against Annapolis were at least partially motivated, and I think are what I consider, maybe I'm in the minority, but I consider antiquated, racist, and classist complaints against housing authorities. And I think fortunately we're well beyond that era of disdain towards public housing and its residents. But I would just hate to have, even on my conscience, copying something that another jurisdiction did that was baked in racial animus. Does that make sense? Or Delegate Carr, or am I like way off base here?
Yeah, I'll forward you the OAG opinion from 1988. And, my take from that was the desire was a legitimate and sincere one to strengthen the public housing in that jurisdiction by improving public confidence in that agency, that there were concerns about simply about accountability and transparency. And I agree that one way we can strengthen public housing is to improve public confidence in this agency. And I think that the hearing testimony is a testament to this agency does need some improvements in its accountability and transparency and communications with the public. So I think passing a bill like this, I don't think ties us to something that may or may not have been related to this bill in the late 80s, early 90s in Annapolis, or racism. I think it's a statement that we support public housing and we support our agencies being transparent and accountable, and we believe that that strengthens public housing and doesn't weaken it.
I appreciate that, and that's a point well taken. And I think where I stand on this, at least right now, is I think that the codifying the judge's order or the adjudicator's order, that seems harmless to me. I mean, I think that just kind of like puts an exclamation point on what I think was some good work by Delegate Carr. But the administrative function exception, just eliminating that entirely and making this different than every other jurisdiction, I don't know, it gives me a little bit of pause about whether we know what we're doing. And I would be a little bit more inclined to just waiting a year and seeing how HOC responds to the new scrutiny and how they respond to the recent order, and how they respond to the committees actually having, and this spotlight shine on them. Because obviously now, Delegate Carr, you have put a big fat underline, exclamation point on the administrative function exception. And so, I maybe lean a little bit more toward monitoring them for a year and seeing whether or not these policies improve at all. And if not, then maybe we go down an Annapolis path. But I don't know, maybe I've just been reading too many of these old 80s Washington Post articles, but I hate to make a leap and become the second mover on something unless we're really firmly sure that we want to follow down that path, if that makes sense. But
okay, thank you, Vice Chair Stewart. Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if it's all right with you, I had a couple questions for Mr. Spann from HOC. So first of all, Mr. Spann, can you remind me, I think you might have addressed this during the bill hearing, but once the decision came down from the Open Meetings Compliance Board in terms of that the HOC committees needed to be in open meetings, has the HOC changed its practices in that regard?
We have. So last year, you all will recall that you passed legislation that required that we stream our commission meetings, which we did ahead of schedule, and work to work out kinks, et cetera. We got the decision November 2nd. The very next committee meeting we had, we streamed and kept open. Delegate Carr himself has noted the numerous challenges in 2018, fewer in 2019, and even fewer still in 2020. And that really is, this was the practice of the commission for as long as the commission had been in existence. It wasn't the consequence of willful disregard for the OMA. And in fact, it was a matter of nomenclature and procedure rather than actual willful effort to sort of hide or be less than transparent.
Thank you. And does HOC have a position on the latest amendment offered by the bill sponsor?
I honestly, I got it. Delegate Carr and I did chat yesterday. We had been working on a gentleman's agreement for a few things to include the legislation as well as the latest OMA complaint. And I got it just before signing on to this. Delegate Carr mentioned that we had a public committee meeting literally just preceding this. And so I have not even, it was a little bit of a surprise because this was not something we discussed yesterday.
Okay, fair enough. I think where I'm at right now in terms of this bill is I'm a little bit hesitant to move ahead with anything, especially as Delegate Stewart pointed out about the administrative function piece. I would not want to put that into law at this point. I'll also just say I appreciate that Delegate Carr had shared with me a few days ago some of the other instances in other jurisdictions where there is stricter requirements under the Opens Meeting Act for those particular local bodies. But as I looked through those, there really were only 2 instances that had to do with when meetings were open or closed, and that's Annapolis, as we've been talking about, and also in St. Mary's County. But that's for everything, it appears, I think, in their local government. But all the rest of the instances really are about when the timeliness of meeting minutes and agendas being posted and kind of more minor things. I'm pretty hesitant to make one-off changes in terms of when a specific body can be in open or closed session. If there's broader problems under the Open Meetings Act, I think probably the whole statute needs to be addressed, but I haven't seen a case made for that yet. So that's kind of where I am today.
Okay, that's very helpful. I see Vice Chair Stewart, you have your hand raised. Before I recognize you, I'd like to make a recommendation to the committee that we consider special ordering this because it's clear that there's a couple of outstanding issues to discuss and think about, especially as it relates to Delegate Carr's proposed amendment and HOC's feedback. I know we are a little bit beyond the time that we had requested of you this afternoon as well. So I will recognize Vice Chair Stewart for additional comments and questions.
I'll withdraw my question in light of the special order.
Okay, great. So then I'd like to then thank the bill sponsor for this bill as well as for the suggested amendment. And thank Mr. Span for your feedback and for joining us today. I ask HOC if you can please take some time to review the amendment and provide feedback to the committee members of your views on Delegate Carr's proposed amendment. That would be particularly helpful. We will circle back with the members of the committee once there's a plan forward on this particular bill. But we're in good posture with 3 of the 4 bills in our committee cleared, which is amazing. So we will come back to considering this for our next discussion or meeting together. And in the meantime, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon and happy holidays with your family. And If you need anything from me, please feel free to reach out. That concludes this morning's work session for the Education, Elections, and Housing Committee. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.